If you facilitate meetings, workshops, or community conversations, at some point, you're going to come across a situation where someone makes a hurtful or harmful comment directed at a particular group of people. Those comments, sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're unintentional, sometimes they don't even realize the impact that it causes, but that doesn't change the impact or how it shifts the energy in the room. As a facilitator, you can't just pretend that the comment didn't happen and move on. You need to address it. But you need to address it in a way that doesn't escalate the conflict and make matters worse. In this video, I'm going to share a 5-step process for addressing those hurtful or harmful comments in a way that calls it out and says it's not okay, but also doesn't escalate the situation. I'm going to share a real-life workshop and how that played out for me. Hi, I'm Kerry Price. I'm the founder of the Facilitators Network, and I use deliberate generosity to make sure that no meeting or workshop is ever wasted. I've been facilitating for 20 odd years, and in that time I've led thousands of meetings, workshops, and community conversations. Nowadays, I help other trainers and facilitators lead those workshops well. If you've ever sat in on a meeting or workshop where someone has dropped a really crappy comment, you'll know how quickly the energy changes. And people are looking to you as the facilitator to take control of the situation. It can be frightening, especially if, like me, you're leading community meetings where there's 200 or 300 people in the room. In this video, I'm going to share the story of a real-life community meeting where a crappy comment was dropped and I had to respond in the moment. I'm going to share with you the 5-step process that I used, and it's all related to your fingers, so you'll be able to remember it wherever you are. So the story I'm about to share was of a community meeting in a small town. There were about 150 people in the room, and we were brainstorming around what a bustling, vibrant town would look like. There'd been some small group discussions, and now we were popcorning those ideas back into the room. We were getting all of the usual things that you would expect, things like a bigger library, another sports field, better events, a parade, all of the things that you would expect for a bustling, vibrant town. Nothing new here. We got a few things up on the board, and then someone called out from the room, "Less," and then insert a particular migrant community here. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I felt a little bit sick as I scanned the room, and members of that migrant community were sitting right there in the meeting. I looked across at the community advisor from our local council, who happened to be of that migrant community, and I was just dumbfounded as to what I might do next. That really sick feeling of, did they just say that out loud? So I went into this 5-step process that helps me in moments just like this. The first step in the process relates to the thumb, and I call it the thermometer. And this is all about checking my attitude or checking my mindset, because whatever mindset I've got going on in that moment is going to be reflected on that person, regardless of the words that come out of my mouth. Now, I have to admit that initially my mindset goes to like, how ignorant are you? Like, there is a lot of judgment that bubbles up for me. And if I respond from that place, it's not going to be helpful. So instead, I need to dial up my mindset to be curious and really be keen to understand, why is she making this comment? What's gone on for her? What's the beliefs behind that makes that an important part of a bustling, vibrant town? Now, I'm not saying that shifting your mindset is easy, but it's absolutely necessary if you want the next part of the conversation to go well. The second part of the process relates to your pointer finger. This is about having a practice approach, because in the heat of the moment where you're kind of reeling from what might have been said, You need to have something that can roll off your tongue really easily. And a practice approach has 3 steps. The first is this. It's a pause. It's about remembering just to take a beat, take a breath, take a few seconds to notice what's going on in the room. Notice what's going on for the person who just made the comment. Like, do they realize that what they've said has had an impact? Was this unintentional, or are they like ready to go harder? How are other people in the room responding? Are they ready to jump on board and turn this conflict from a microaggression into something major? Or are they feeling hurt? What are the facial expressions and the body language that's happening? But also the pause is about noticing what's going on for me. How am I responding to this? What's been triggered for me? And what do I need to regulate in my own self so that I can hold this conversation well? That's the pause. The second part of the practiced approach is the call it out. And in my opinion, if someone makes a remark that's harmful or hurtful to another group of people, you absolutely must call it out. But it doesn't have to be in a lectury, shamey kind of way. It's just about letting people know that that comment, it had an impact. So it might be as simple as something like, oh, that comment feels a bit harsh. Or, I'm not sure if that comment landed the way that you intended it to. Just letting people know that actually those kind of comments, not okay in this space. Now, sometimes, depending on context and depending on the gravity of the comment, that might be all you want to do. Call it out and move on. But sometimes, like in the case of this workshop, if you're feeling up to it, now is an opportunity to call it in. And what I mean by calling it in is to get curious and try and unpack the meaning behind what's going on. So in the context of this particular workshop, we were popcorning in what would make a bustling, vibrant town. We got this comment about having less of a particular migrant community, and I dialed up my curiosity. I paused, worked out what was going on for me and others in the room. I called it out by saying, oh, that comment feels a bit harsh. And then I called it in by saying, I'm curious to know why that's important to you. And I held my breath because at that moment, who knew what was going to come out? But here's the thing. If you're going to go through to the call it in stage, you must do the next step. So now we move to this finger, the tall man finger, which as the tallest finger represents the antennae. So if you're going to call in the comment and get curious as to what's behind it, then you must be prepared to use your antennae and listen empathetically. If you're not prepared to listen empathetically, don't call it in. Call it out and call it a day. Listening empathetically means giving people a chance to actually respond to the question and for you to get curious about what the real concern is behind that. Now, I know some facilitators get really scared at this point for 2 reasons. 1, they don't know where the comment's going to go. And 2, they don't want to give the spotlight to someone who is hurting other people in the room. In my experience, when you let people answer the question without interrupting, they talk themselves out pretty quickly. Within about 30 or 40 seconds, they will give you the thinking behind their comment. In this particular case, the woman went on to say, in her opinion, this particular group of people were taking all the jobs. Her son was unemployed, he'd been trying to get a job for 6 months or so, wasn't able to get to work, and she was casting blame on this particular community. Now, I didn't necessarily agree with her, but getting into an argument about whether that was true or not in that moment would have just escalated the situation. What my role as a facilitator was to empathize with how she was feeling, not necessarily agreeing with what was behind it. So I was able to say to her, well, I can imagine if your son was unable to get work for 6 months, that would cause quite a lot of anxiety for a mother. Which then brings me to the 4th finger, the ring finger. And the 4th finger represents a relationship. At that point, it was so important that I was able to build a relationship between the woman making the comment and me. I was able to build a relationship between the woman making the comment and the community that she was just slandering, and build a relationship between the comment and the purpose of the workshop. So, to catch you up, she'd made a comment around wanting less of a particular migrant community. I called it out by saying, oh, that comment feels a bit harsh, and then called it in by saying, I'm curious to know why that's important to you. She expressed that it was because she felt that they were taking all the jobs. The relationship bit sounded like this. Wow, I can hear that that's causing a bit of anxiety for you. I imagine if your son hasn't had a job for 6 months, that would be quite an anxious time. I imagine that any mother from any ethnicity would have those same feelings of anxiety if their son couldn't find a job. So what I'm hearing is that a vibrant, bustling town needs enough jobs for everyone. She said, yeah, that's what I mean. We just need to have enough jobs for everyone. I said, excellent. Let's put that on the board. Now, this sounds like it was a really long conversation, but actually this whole exchange took place in about 2 minutes. And it's not that I agreed or disagreed with what she was saying. It was about making sure that this microaggression didn't turn into a full-blown conflict. Which takes me to the last finger. If you raise your hand like this and try and move your little finger, you'll notice that every other finger moves with it. And that's a reminder that any decision you make in the moment as a facilitator is going to have an impact in the room. And so you might have chosen to call the comment in, but at any given time, you can choose again to call it out. You don't have to commit to that path. You're continuing to pivot depending on what's coming out. So if the conversation got worse, if the comments got more harmful and more hurtful and just started going in a really bad direction, I would go back to calling it out, and I would say something like, I've already suggested that those kind of comments are not okay in this space. I'm now telling you that they are not acceptable. If you were to make a comment like that again, I will ask you to leave the room. Then, if they do it again, you can remind them that you've suggested, you've told, you've asked, and now it would be a great time to exit. So this 5-step process about dialing up curiosity, calling it out, maybe calling it in, listening empathetically, building relationship, and then being mindful that you need to change and pivot as you go along, it's not fail-safe. It's really important that you be mindful of your own environment. Who's in the room? What other risks are involved in having this conversation in a public setting? But what I know for sure is if you lead with generosity, make generous assumptions, you lead with curiosity and try and get behind the comment and not just take it at face value, then you have a much better chance of having a meaningful dialogue and stopping that microaggression from becoming a full-scale war. So thankfully, not every workshop is going to be like that, but that doesn't mean it's going to be without challenges. There are still other kinds of behaviors that you might need to facilitate through. So in my next video, Effective Facilitation Techniques for Managing Loud Voices, I share with you some strategies for some less complicated behaviors that you'll need to manage in the room. You can find the link in the description below.